All right, so that right there was one of my staff members at my massage spot. Her name is Beam. When you guys come out here to Thailand, come check out my massage shop. The hotel is already open, but the sports bar should be open sometime around February or March. We training the staff right now how to cook. For now, just go ahead and email me, Dontaesboxingnation@gmail.com, if you guys are planning on coming out here, because right now the name of the shop is UK Pattaya Massage, but I'm gonna change that name. So the name will be changed probably the beginning of the year. But for now, you guys can go ahead and follow Beam on her Instagram. With that being said, let's get into the video. Dontaesboxingnation, what's going on, guys? So this is a Thai website you guys are looking at, and this is the first time that I have seen them report news on a boxing match, an American boxing match. And they were obviously reporting Terence Crawford's victory over Shawn Porter. Now, I'm not saying it's the very first time they've ever done it. It's the first time I've seen it because I follow the Thai websites for all the news out here. I've learned how to speak a lot of Thai. I went to school for a couple of months to learn how to kind of read and write it a little bit. The name of this Thai website right here is Sanook.com. Sanook means fun. And the article, at least the headline, is the translation is something like moving forward without defeat. Crawford stops Porter in the 10th round, defends the WBO title. It just gives you an idea of how big this fight was in terms of the best fighting the best. I mean, outside of Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury, and that's not even on this level because you didn't have two fighters that had the skill set of Terence Crawford and Shawn Porter in the ring at the same time. Because we've seen so many mismatches where we knew who was going to win. Hands down, we knew. We knew the other guy had no chance. But in this fight, it was drama throughout the fight. It was truly analogous to a Sugar Ray Leonard versus Hearns or a Hagler versus Duran, etc., etc. Not saying that these guys have already accomplished that, but I'm saying in terms of competition, in terms of the best fighting the best, this was very close to that. Terence Crawford, he did exactly what old media was hoping he wouldn't do, which is go in there and become the first person to stop the very durable Shawn Porter, the very competitive Shawn Porter. Because they knew it would be very difficult to try to justify anyone else being considered pound for pound number one over Crawford. Obviously, we're talking about Canelo Alvarez. Crawford, by way of contrast, Crawford is in arguably the deepest, the most dangerous division in the sport of boxing. I mean, you got a couple of them out there. You got the middleweight, the junior middleweight division. You got the lightweight division, but with the lightweight division, you have all of the talent in the world, but you don't have the fights because of people like Teofimo Lopez and Ryan Garcia, who were supposed to be part of that Fab Four that we've been talking about, right? So this is what makes the welterweight division a lot more deeper because all of those guys are experienced, right? Shawn Porter is equivalent to an undefeated fighter because he comes out and he fights like an undefeated fighter. Very dangerous, very unorthodox, extremely unpredictable. And Terence Crawford stopped him and retired Shawn Porter. Shawn Porter announced his retirement after this fight, which is understandable. Once again, he's in the deepest division. He's faced everyone. And Shawn said he doesn't want to be a gatekeeper. But it is easier said than done, though, because once again, once you retire, all of a sudden you start getting all these crazy offers, to become a gatekeeper. So we'll see if Shawn Porter can resist the temptation and stay retired. But right now, there's no doubt about it. Hands down, Terence Crawford is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. And I was saying it as I was watching this fight. Once again, it was a very close fight. It was up in the air. And I said, if Crawford stops Shawn Porter, I mean, honestly, even if he would have beat him in 12 rounds, just because of the level of opposition, the level of competition that he continues to beat, that alone would have solidified his spot at number one when it comes to pound for pound. But to stop him, which is something that even Errol Spence couldn't do, that makes him pound for pound the best fighter in the world without a doubt. In fact, it's so clear that Terence Crawford is now pound for pound the best fighter in the world, that even ESPN's panel damn near unanimously removed Canelo Alvarez from their number one spot and replaced him with Terence Crawford. Now, I'm going to go ahead and actually play the exchange or play the piece when they break this down, the entire panel. But before I do, I just want to mention this because I thought it was really funny. Now, ESPN, they knew all along, even when they had Canelo at number one, they knew all along that Crawford was number one. I'll tell you why. Because remember, before Lomachenko lost, the dispute was always it's either Crawford or it's Lomachenko, right? Now, and I believe it was Mark Kriegel, Andre Ward, and I think it was Max Kellerman that all said that Terence Crawford was number one over Lomachenko, but ESPN's pound for pound list would always have Lomachenko at number one and then have Crawford at number two. So the question was, if Crawford was already number two, how is it once Lomachenko lost, everyone started to put Canelo at number one? Because the majority of legit pound for pound lists was like this. They would either have Crawford at number one or they would have Lomachenko at number one, but they were always 1 and 2. So it never made any sense. All of a sudden, Lomachenko loses and Canelo jumps to number one. ESPN knew that never made any sense. So now they're forced to admit that Crawford is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. You guys are looking at this picture, right? There was only one guy on the whole panel that said Canelo Alvarez was number one. Guess who that was? I'm going to let you guys think about it before I let you know. But let's go ahead and get into this clip. And as I'm playing this clip, I'm going to break down what they're saying.
The pound-for-pound conversation, I think, is one that we should get into right now, and then we can analyze the fight. Because Timmy and I had long been voting Terence Crawford number one pound-for-pound in the world over Canelo in Inoue. When Crawford went with the inactivity and Canelo started fighting and cleaning things up at 168 pounds, at least I understood who I was voting for because I had recent activity, and that's why I was voting Canelo number one. I believe that the accomplishment of Canelo at 168 pounds is great. You're undisputed, you've won. But it's a grander accomplishment to understand what Crawford has done now that he's come back and fought. I'm also a guy that had the first Triple G fight in favor of Triple G. Crawford, I have never had a fight that I have ever watched where one thing I've seen gives me any doubt. He will be my new number one pound-for-pound fighter, but you can mix up the bag. You can pull out the name Canelo. Yep. I have no problem with it in a way. Crawford's getting my vote as number one, and that is not recency bias. I was waiting for him to come back and fight.
Porter's a very, very good fighter. He's not quite Triple G either. But I'll say this. When you look back at history, you will rate pound-for-pound fighters differently than you rated them in the moment. What I mean is, when Mayweather retired, I thought Andre Ward was the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. When Andre Ward retired, I felt Terence Crawford was the best pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Not at every year since Andre retired has Crawford offered enough evidence to keep him in the number one slot. But I suspect, looking back at it, I will think, in fact, he did occupy that slot the whole time. I remember years ago when Roy Jones was clearly better than everyone else in boxing, but there were some years where he wasn't fighting real big fights, and Oscar De La Hoya was, or Shane Mosley was, or Felix Trinidad was, and so they were jumped up ahead of Roy, and then Roy would come out and do something, and you go, well, no, Roy's actually better than those guys.
All right, guys, now before they continue, let me go ahead and give you my thoughts on what stood out the most right there in that segment I just played for you. It was when Max Kellerman said, yeah, Sean Porter is good, he's great, but he's no Gennady Golovkin. We could also say that Golovkin is good, but he's no Sean Porter. If you really look at Gennady Golovkin's career, first of all, he's far more predictable than a Sean Porter. There's no doubt about it. You know, Gennady Golovkin, he has power, he has a great jab, he's aggressive, but he's far more easier to figure out. When it comes to someone like Sean Porter, he's extremely unpredictable. He's athletic. He can back you up. He can box. He has a jab. He has foot movement angles, etc., etc. And he's very durable, okay? And when you look at Gennady Golovkin's resume and some of the guys he faced, look at the guys that gave him problems. A lot of people feel he lost to Danny Jacobs. Kell Brook, he moved up 2 weight classes and was completely outboxing Gennady Golovkin. I mean, it's one thing for Kell Brook to beat Sean Porter in a close fight when they're both at their natural weight class, but he moved up 2 weight classes and was completely outboxing Gennady Golovkin until Gennady Golovkin, he started to use his power and size to bully him, and he got him out of there. You have Willie Monroe that gave Gennady Golovkin a lot of problems. Steve Rose, one of Golovkin's biggest cherry picks, was actually making the fight extremely competitive against Gennady Golovkin. So you can't use the age angle because these type of problems have stemmed all the way back to Kasim Uma. When Golovkin fought Kasim Uma, who was an aggressive African fighter, he was completely winning the fight until Golovkin stopped him in the very, very late rounds. So style-wise, Golovkin has always had problems with guys that were not on Sean Porter's level. If Golovkin and Sean Porter were naturally the same weight class, first of all, Golovkin would have never even fought a Sean Porter. But if they would have fought, trust me, with the foot movement, the angles, and the fact that Sean Porter can jump on the inside and back you up, he would have gave Golovkin all the problems in the world. Golovkin was always uncomfortable with guys trying to back him up. That's what happened in the Kasim Uma fight, and that's kind of what happened in the Willie Monroe fight. Willie Monroe, who had no power, was actually doing better coming forward against Golovkin than he did when he was moving around or moving away from him in the first couple of rounds. Okay, with that spiel, let's go ahead and get back into this conversation.
And we welcome you back here to Vegas on the heels of Terence Crawford's sensational 10th round TKO victory over Showtime's Sean Porter, who was a 2-time welterweight champion, who fought everybody in the division, had proven himself, and nobody ever got rid of him. And then all of a sudden, here we are, Tim Bradley, and Terence Crawford steps it up little by little and then was just as dynamic as could be in round 10. First the left uppercut, then the combination with the right hook. And Crawford's on top of the world.
It's just a matter of time. You know, I knew that Sean Porter, the mistakes would come to the forefront, especially as the fight got later on. The lunging is part of the breakdown, lunging forward. I knew Crawford was going to be able to land the uppercut, check hook. And, you know, it took him some time. We knew this fight wasn't going to be easy. We knew that. I said it won't be easy, but I knew that Crawford will get it done. And I knew he would stop him. You actually picked the round 10. I picked the round 11. I said the later rounds, he was going to get to Porter and stop him. But he's my #1 pound for pound. You want to know why?
Yes.
Because there's nobody on the planet that has the skill set that he possesses. Now, he don't have the same opportunities as Canelo has.
Canelo's the biggest star in the sport.
Exactly. And he has the most accolades. But Crawford's not too far off. But as far as skill basis, Crawford is the best fighter on the planet.
Okay, so it's not just in terms of being the most skilled fighter. It's in terms of going against the most dangerous opposition, going against the better opposition. Terence Crawford, when it comes to Tim Bradley talking about accolades, when it comes to Terence Crawford, he was the lightweight champion, right? And understand, this is the difference between Terence Crawford and Canelo Alvarez. Every single division that Terence Crawford became champion, Terence Crawford was the best fighter in that division. At lightweight, he won the title. He was the best in the division. He moved up to 140, became undisputed. And of course, because he doesn't have the complexion for the protection, old media treated it like it was nothing. You know, it was nobody like Jim Gray saying, oh, you're one of the greatest fighters of all time now, Canelo, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody did this, right? So he was the #1, the best fighter at 140. Then he moves up to 147, and now he is considered the best welterweight in the world. Contrast to Canelo Alvarez. When Canelo was at 154, the first belt he won was against a guy who wasn't even a junior middleweight. It was Matthew Hatton. They had to bring him up from welterweight, and he fought Canelo Alvarez for a vacant belt. That's the first belt that Canelo won. Then 3 years later, Canelo, he beat Austin Trout, which he was ordered to fight Austin Trout by Floyd Mayweather to get the Mayweather fight, right? So, of course, then he lost to Floyd Mayweather. Okay? So my point is, he was never the best fighter at 154. And while he was at 154, he was in one of the deepest divisions, just like Crawford is in one of the deepest divisions right now at 147. So then Canelo, he fled to 160, where he told the public he wanted to become undisputed at 160. But what happened? All of a sudden, Demetrius Andrade becomes a champion there as well. Charlo becomes his mandatory, and all of a sudden, he flees to 175 to fight Rocky Fielding for his title. Now, once again, let's look at the side-by-side contrast when it comes to having a dangerous mandatory. Canelo Alvarez had a very dangerous mandatory in Jamal Charlo, a man who had been calling him out for years since 154. Look at how Crawford dealt with his dangerous mandatory, Sean Porter, and look at how Canelo dealt with his. Canelo vacated his title instead of taking on the tough challenge, which is what you're supposed to do when you're a champion. You are supposed to defend your title. That's how it works. These are reasons why Terence Crawford is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. Terence Crawford would never surrender his belt to a mandatory because that guy is dangerous. He would never do it. Canelo has already did it 3 or 4 times. And he's probably about to do it a 5th time when it comes to David Benavidez. So now we have 168. And there's no doubt about it, Canelo is the most accomplished at 168. But remember, unlike Crawford having the options, if it was up to Crawford, and I keep telling you guys this, Canelo has all the options in the world. He can fight whoever he wants to. So you have the options to fight the best, and with that power, you decide to fight the weakest opposition. If Crawford could fight whoever he wanted to, he would have already had Errol Spence, Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, Manny Pacquiao. They would have all been on his resume right now. So my point is, Canelo Alvarez, he could have fought the best super middleweight in the division, which is David Benavidez, if he wanted to. He's choosing not to. Now he's going to move all the way up to 190 and fight a guy who's been knocked out twice that no one has ever heard of. This man, Makabu, he has no defense, he has no speed, he has no rhythm, no coordination. The only thing he has is a belt. Meanwhile, Terence Crawford is beating Sean Porter, stopping him and calling out the David Benavidez of his division, which is Errol Spence. So like I said, every single division Terence Crawford went to, he became the best fighter in that division. Let's get back to the panel. Next up is Andre Ward.
We're having a fascinating conversation over here with Max and Mark and Bernardo, but let's bring in the guy who was the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, Andre Ward. Dre, your takeaway from what we saw tonight from Terence Crawford?
Well, I'm going to just say this about Sean Porter. Man, he's everything that is right for the sport. Outside the ring, inside the ring, he approaches the game the right way. Great representative, and I have so much respect for him, and I hope that his legacy is not remembered, or he's not remembered as a guy who took the big ones but couldn't win it, because he's in every fight that he's always taken, and he's done more in terms of his willingness to take these big fights than some guys do in their whole career. So that's the first thing. And the post-fight thing with Kenny Porter, I don't know what that was about. I could have done without that, because I thought Sean looked really good, and I don't know what happened in camp, but Sean looked really good, probably his best that I've ever seen him. He just got caught with a shot, and Kenny Porter did know what was coming, because Terence Crawford is the best finisher in the game. On to the pound for pound talk. I never took Terence Crawford off my pound for pound list, and part of that is because I've been through these times and these moments as a professional where I'm fighting and I'm cleaning guys out, but maybe there's a certain person they want me to fight, or maybe I had an injury or had some issues with the WBC, and you have lulls, and it's very easy for us to forget what a person did or the quality they are because you haven't seen them. I never forgot about what Terence Crawford brought to the table. I looked at, he's fighting the best guys he can fight. He's demolishing all these guys. The last time Terence Crawford had a decision win was maybe 5.5 years ago, and he's calling for the big fights. That should count for something, and tonight he confirmed why.
Max, it is now 9 straight knockout wins as he comes in defense of welterweight title. But I'll let you lead the conversation with Mark and Bernardo as for #1 pound for pound.
Well, who do you like? Well, I agree with Dre, but I think that we should separate
what Canelo has going for him in this pound-for-pound conversation is economic might. So he can pick and choose. His universe of opportunity is much greater than what
Canelo can fight anyone he wants.
Right.
Anyone he chooses,
and he can also determine, to great respect, the terms. In terms of the eye test, in terms of the skill, in terms of what it's like to download information. And again, I'm with Dre. I thought that Porter was at his best tonight. But in terms of that eye test, I'm with Crawford.
All right. So now you guys waited for it. You're about to find out who was the only person on the panel that said that Canelo Alvarez is pound for pound the best fighter in the world. You ready? It was Mexico's own Bernard Usana, who's sitting far to the right. So for him to be the only panelist to say Canelo is still pound for pound, I'm sure everyone was sitting there thinking to themselves, oh, okay, well, that was expected. But it was kind of funny how Bernard started off talking, because the first thing he said was, it's kind of difficult for me. Let me go ahead and play the clip.
It's very difficult for me because for the longest time I had Crawford above Canelo, and then when he became the undisputed champion, I said, you've got to give him credit for what he did, cleaning out a division in 11 months, and there was no easy touches. He made them look easy, and I think that's a credit to Canelo Alvarez. Now he's going to try to move up to cruiserweight now, and you know, it's a 10-pound difference because now, because of the Bridgerweight division, it's not the full 200 pounds, it's 190, and it goes back to the same criticism that he's always received. Setting terms, making things happen on your terms, and that'll be a detractor for him. But in the end, I'm still going to stick with Canelo, but if there was one guy I had to fight or didn't want to fight, it's the guy that was in the ring tonight, and that's Terence Crawford.
So he admits that Canelo Alvarez, he fights guys on his terms. Once again, he's not actually technically moving up to cruiserweight. The WBC is the one that created the Bridgerweight title. So now, if you have a WBC belt, you don't have to fight a real cruiserweight at 200 pounds. You can fight a cruiserweight at 190 pounds, which is what Canelo is doing. But forget about all of that. That doesn't even matter. The most important thing is Canelo is fighting the weakest guy in the division. Forget about the weakest champion. This guy might be one of the weakest fighters in the top 5 or the top 10 of the division. Like I said, he's gotten knocked out twice already. If Canelo was really chasing greatness, he would have went after the #1 guy in the division. And then you heard Bernard admit that if there was a guy that I had to fight or I didn't want to fight, out of all the fighters in the world, it would be Terence Crawford. Basically, he was saying that Crawford is a better fighter. He's pound for pound the best fighter, right? But then, you know, he finishes by saying, but hey, but no matter what, I got to go with Canelo. Yeah, we know what you're saying. I mean, it's no different than Robert Garcia and David Benavidez. Every time they do an interview, they're straight up with it. And I have no problem with it. I respect them for it. Whenever they do an interview and they're asked who's going to win, so-and-so or the Mexican, they say, listen, man, I'm Mexican. I got to go with the Mexican. And that's exactly what Bernard Usana just said. I'm telling you guys right now, the fact that Terence Crawford got this Sean Porter fight, things are playing out the way I said they had to play out in order for Terence Crawford to kind of take over the sport in terms of being the best to where it's pretty much undeniable. I told you guys a while ago, if Sean Porter cannot get the Errol Spence fight, if he cannot get the Pacquiao fight, he needs to fight Sean Porter. And I said if he beats Sean Porter, especially if he stops Sean Porter, that will put an enormous amount of pressure on Errol Spence to actually take the fight. And now it's to the point to where even if Errol doesn't want to take the fight, now Terence Crawford is already considered universally the pound-for-pound best fighter in the world. He can go ahead and choose who he wants to fight. And when I say choose, we're not talking about Macaboos or Rocky Fieldings, because we know Terence wants the best. Terence has a lot of options. He has Virgil Ortiz, Keith Thurman, Ugas. He already said maybe he'll move up to 154. Can you guys imagine how big it would be if he moved up to 154 and fought either Jamel Charlo or Castaño and beat them? While Canelo Alvarez is fighting all the Rocky Fieldings and Macaboos in the world. It's just going to make Crawford looked 1,000 times better. And that's what's happening right now. So with that being said, I'm gonna wrap this video up. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out, guys. If you're looking to repair eczema scars, burns and bruises, dark spots and blemishes, then this right here is the perfect product for you guys. It's called Elo Deki Face and Body Oil. Athletes and top-ranking boxers, they're also using it after training to reduce swelling, inflammation, and to ease the pain. So get yours today. Go to elodeki.com, like them on Facebook, and follow them on Instagram. Fellas, I've got some great news for you. If you've lost your hair or have a receding hairline, the time has come when you can finally get your hairline back through a process called Scalp Micropigmentation. So here's how it works. It's a hair tattoo that replicates the look of your hair follicles when you have fully shaved it down. So to get this hookup, make sure you follow and contact my man ScalpCarolinas on Instagram. Contact them at 704-499-3471 and make sure you follow them on Instagram.